Thank you, everyone, for returning to Mastering Counseling Podcast. We are thrilled today to have Carol Park, who has been in this field for over 30 years. So she has a wealth of experience to share. She is not only a registered dietitian, but also a licensed professional counselor. Thanks so much for giving us your time today, Carol.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm actually really honored to be here.
That is great to hear in your small, not small, it's a huge thing, but in your window of expertise, we've talked to, I think, a couple other people about the food aspect and body image, but it's such a huge issue in our country. So I'm glad that we're talking about it again. Your practice is called Recovery Reconnection. And why don't you tell us about the vision for that and when that began?
Sure. So when I thought of the question, I was like, oh, that's so interesting because when I started my practice, which would have been in the early 90s, websites really weren't even a thing. I think the first website started in the 90s at some point. So when I started my website, I really just thought of I kind of call it the 3 R's. Recovery requires reconnection, but that
Hmm.
seemed like a really long name for a website to have to type out. So I just
Mm-hmm.
shortened it to recovery reconnection. But I really look at the eating disorder and really probably our journeys in life in general as a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So recovery requires reconnection. So I look at the disconnect from body, disconnect from self, disconnect from others, and disconnect from the spiritual realm of life. And so,
Okay.
again, requiring reconnection in each of these areas. So, the disconnect from body, I always speak to it as the connected end of the spectrum because you're not either fully connected to body or not connected to body. So, the spectrum, the connection to body is self love, self care, self nurturing. And on the
Mm-hmm.
disconnect end of things, it's self loathing, self hatred, self punishment, self destruction. So that reconnection to body, which again involves a lot of self love, self care, self nurturing. So I always talk about the very same behavior, let's say, can be on either end of the spectrum. So going
Mm-hmm.
for a walk can be very much out of self care. Going for a walk can be very much self-loathing at times. If
Mm-hmm.
you're beating yourself up, I've got to get out there and do this. Not going for a walk could be self-care. Not going for a walk could be self-punishment. So that reconnection to body. And so then the disconnect from self, very often, of course, the eating disorder is a disconnect from self. Sometimes it comes out in that over focus on body. So instead of I feel sad, happy, lonely, mad, it may come out as I feel fat or I feel ugly or I feel. And so there begins some of that. Let me try and resolve my discomfort and not understanding myself by managing my body or over managing it or not taking care of it in some form or fashion, that ignoring our bodies. And so that disconnect from self. And then the
Mm-hmm.
disconnect from others, we can't really connect with others if we don't have a sense of self to connect with. So we can be with others and really not feel connected in the process. And then
Mm-hmm.
the spiritual realm, where sometimes the behaviors in life become that higher power, become the thing that we may try and turn to feel okay. So that's where it really originated, was recovery requires, but really recovery reconnection, to really try and reconnect in these realms.
Great explanation. I like how you describe something like a walk. It can be such a great thing and self-care, and then it can also be self-deprecating and so much of life, it feels like a spectrum of what's good for someone or not somebody else, or how often it's occurring. A lot of things are good, but they become overused. And so thank you
Mhm.
for explaining that. Why don't we talk a little bit about the practice started in the 90s and things were very different then, but still eating disorders, were definitely occurring. Let's see, yeah, I was a teenager in the 90s. So, I do remember hearing about a few people, struggling with that, but I think it's probably increased because
Mhm,
we did not have social media.
mhm.
Um, so why don't you talk to us about early on, like your education and then how you focus in this area? And did you become a dietitian or a counselor first?
Yeah, such a good question. So I actually became a dietitian first, and I'm not ashamed to say that my journey actually began with my own eating disorder.
Mm,
So when I went to college, which would have been in 1980, and started into college, I majored in nutrition because I was in the throes of an eating disorder.
mm,
Didn't honestly really know it because, as you have alluded to, social media was not a thing then. When I
mhm,
went to college, I had a typewriter. I did not have a computer, and
mhm.
so I'm not ashamed of my age either. So lots of life experience, but I really went to college with a raging eating disorder, majored in
Mm.
nutrition because of that. And when I graduated from college in 1984, social media was magazines. And so People magazine, Karen Carpenter died from her eating disorder and was on the front of People magazine in 1984. I still have the magazine because that
Wow.
was really, even for myself, like a, oh my gosh, like I didn't know this was a thing, and other people didn't either. It was like
Mm.
kind of this introduction. There were really not very many books even written about eating disorders. I think I could name all three of them probably at the time.
Yeah.
And so when that kind of became a thing, then I started my master's in nutrition and started looking at the effect of purging, specifically vomiting, on basal metabolic rate as my own personal question and all. So
Mhm.
really that was the start of my journey, was really just a lot of trying to understand myself, because I wasn't majoring in nutrition for the good of me. It was really to the obsession of me at
Okay.
that point in time. So, and
Yeah.
then, yes, so magazines that, were a huge influence, but you only saw at the grocery store stand, or if you bought it or had it delivered to your door, that really
Right.
were such an influence on body image. Yes, this is now on steroids times many, right? Of just social media constantly with that question of, am I enough? Am I enough of whatever, thin enough, rich enough, smart enough, pretty enough, any of the enoughs. So really is just kind of, oh, so I feel like a lot of my work that I do is working with that aspect of shame resilience. I am certified in
Mm.
Brene's work. I'm a Daring Way certified facilitator, and so I did
Okay.
her work. So
Hmm.
looking at the shame resilience, the vulnerability, looking at values clarification is a huge part of kind of where I base some of the work that I do with people today.
Okay. Um, Thank you for sharing, the personal start. And I feel like it's another one of those spectrums where you were struggling and maybe didn't even know, all the while majoring in nutrition and everything you should be doing. But even that you felt like wasn't for the positive, it was for the negative. So, so interesting. And then how did you, I know you said you are a Daring Way facilitator. When did you officially get the school, or not school, the licensed counselor degree?
Let's see, I would have graduated in 2009 from my program, and then 2011 was fully licensed after I got my hours under
Right.
supervision, et cetera, and then just combine those. So early on, as in the dietitian role, I started in hospital programs as the dietitian with eating disorders, and then went out and did private practice with eating disorders in the dietitian role. And then I just kept running into people wanting to talk more about the other issues, of which I would refer them back to their therapist. And then it was like, am I practicing outside of my scope? And so to
Mm,
kind of end that internal dilemma, then I
yeah.
just said, you know what, I'm going to just go back and go ahead and get the LPC credential. So today, sometimes I'll be in the LPC role, sometimes I'll be in a dietitian role, and sometimes I'll weave back and forth. If someone refers to me and says, I actually want you to do both, then I'm comfortable doing that as well.
Okay. And then just question on that. When you say, do you find even with the same client, do you make specifically, I'm working with you as a dietitian, and then possibly the next week is I'm working with you on as more of a counselor or therapist? Or do they see you solely in one frame? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So if I'm doing both, I actually don't say this week is dietitian and this week is therapy. I do blend them and weave back and forth in and out. If like a therapist has referred to me as their dietitian, then I will just stay in the dietitian role and consult with the therapist, or vice versa. At times, then somebody else may be in the dietitian role and I'm in the therapist role. And so we would consult.
Okay, yeah, very
Yeah.
interesting. We love talking on here about kind of different career paths and how they're interwoven for all different types of, therapists are helping all different populations and needs. And so then they become more of an expert even in that type of career or that type of person. And it's fun to see the worlds collide a little bit. Um, what what would you say, being that you have such great experience and knowledge, what are some things that you feel like have shifted over the 30 years and changed, whether it's for the better or things that you feel are for the worse? How do you see it in kind of a broad up high view?
Yeah, you alluded to it earlier. I mean, social media was a game changer and still is in terms of the influence on the not enoughs and the rise in eating disorders. So we see the rise. The other thing that was a real game changer, and you may have read about this, it was out in a lot of publications, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, COVID. When COVID hit, my adolescent population of eating disorders went through the roof. I was at that point
Mm,
already beginning to take my Fridays off of kind of moving into that place in my career. And I went back into the office on Fridays because there was such a need. And I think so much of it was, as all of us, we didn't know there's this massive vulnerability, which I love. Brené's definition of vulnerability was this uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Talk about uncertainty, so much emotional exposure. And I just think it was such a like, ooh, on us all at once. And
hmm
especially adolescents who then had to be home, couldn't be with their peers, homeschooling, all of that. They didn't know how to cope. And so I think a big part of that became their over control or over focus on food. And that could have gone a multitude of ways with eating
hmm
disorders and the spectrum and range of eating disorders.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, there's been so much about COVID weight. And yeah, I just think it'll be many years before we fully work ourselves out of that. You mentioned adolescence and just talk to us about kind of the age ranges that you work with. Do you work with both genders? Do you work with certain age groups? How do you decide who you can work with or not?
Yeah, so I really, there are people who work with like elementary age and such. I really start, I would say, teenagers, so maybe junior high, high school, up through, you know, 70-year olds.
Wow.
That
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I also work with a lot of women who might be in my age range, which I'm in my early 60s, but also women in their 40s, 50s, because it's really not just a teenager, college age disorder. Because again, all of the body image stuff, and we see peaks in eating disorders. So, peak of puberty, peak going off to college. These are major life transitions. And so, for older women, what's a major life transition is menopause. And what
Mm-hmm.
happens in menopause? Your body changes, just like in
Mm-hmm.
puberty, again, bombarded with um, advertising, social media, which tells women what going through menopause, hey, your body doesn't have to change. You don't have to gain that expected belly fat. You don't have to gain this expected X number of pounds of weight. It would be like telling someone in puberty that your body doesn't have to change,
Mm-hmm.
which it's possible if you do really disordered things like get an eating disorder to keep your body from going through puberty. You can. So I'm very passionate about this, especially as an older in life woman, that with
Mm-hmm.
menopause, all the commercials that are out there. So I do speak to the belly fat that we're supposed to lay down in menopause. I call it our estrogen pouch because this is where you can store estrogen as your body begins to decrease making that. And it's very protective for our brains. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we try and not go through these menopausal changes, we really potentially set up future problems for ourselves in life, including cognitive, disability, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so menopause is another, which is why in my practice, so teenagers, college age girls, women, young women, and then also women who are of my own age who, yes, we still are impacted by everything that we're told we should be and have to be, and that loss of sense of self.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that message. And honestly, I mean, you hear a lot about encouraging younger girls to be who they are and all of that. And I think some things have changed, with even ads that were displaying all types of sizes and shapes and colors. And so that is good. There's still a long way to go, but yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that message on the menopausal side. It is always about what kind of treatment are you getting and getting back to your 30s or whatever it is. So that's a great message. And yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
people realize. And when you say cognitive difficulties, would you say, are you connecting? Obviously, not everyone who loses weight in menopause, but are you connecting between dementia and those type of issues?
I actually do. And so here's where it's
Okay.
like, not as an MD, I don't want to say it's like it causes
Yeah.
dementia, but brain fog, that it's like,
Mm,
okay, when estrogen levels drop, it really is more of kind of that brain fog. I can't quite remember. And so, again, if we stored some belly fat where the body really wants to in menopause and it's very protective in nature, so if we really work to prevent these changes, again, I do think we set ourselves up for, so be it, we call it dementia. Again, I think you can diagnose that in different ways, and I'm not an MD, so
mhm.
little sidebar there.
Yeah.
But yes, I do think that we really want our estrogen pouch as we move into menopause and have that storage there that's actually really good for our brain.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for teaching. I think that'll be a really key point for all our listeners. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that out. Um, let's this issue of eating disorders is extremely complex. Just a year or two ago, I was in a training and I definitely learned about a new type of eating disorder that hadn't been, as much as the where people don't eat at all or bulimia. And then there was another angle, I can't even remember the name, but why don't you just talk to us a little bit about the various types of disorders within eating that you're seeing?
Yeah, so there's the one that's ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, which isn't as much based in the body image side. It may be more based in Sometimes there's, let's say, for example, a choking incident that then makes one fearful of eating, or there was
Mm,
some negative connotation. It maybe occurs in trauma that sets up a negative connotation. So it's really more the restricting and the avoidance of food that comes from that. Maybe, or maybe there's a medical diagnosis that just makes food unappealing at some point, and then it becomes a
mm,
set behavior and the person becomes malnourished. And so you have to work with them to restore the ability to eat and to nourish
okay.
bodies. And then you have, the norms that you talked about. So you've got anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and then they have now atypical anorexia, which nervosa, which I'm grateful for, because people have the idea that you have to have this emaciated body to actually be able to be diagnosed with anorexia. But it's really not so much about size and shape of your body. It's really about, are you adequately nourishing your body? So the atypical kind of takes away the idea that you must be, X% of ideal body weight. They've kind of done away with that a little bit more as a
Hmm.
diagnostic criteria, and just saying, basically, are you malnourished? Like, are you adequately nourishing your body? And it doesn't have to be based on a size or shape. And there's
Hmm.
so much shame around bodies, just period, in general, that building some of that shame resilience to be able to say, look, all of us deserve to nourish our bodies. We all deserve. So I just refer to a lot of times as our bodies as our earth suits. This is my
Mm,
earth suit. This is the vehicle that I've been given to navigate this life and pursue my passions, my purpose, my values. And so I
mm,
just kind of neutralize, because again, we're in this culture that is toxic. It's actually really, I used to say early on in my career, we live in a crazy culture. Now I just say it's toxic, it's sick.
mm.
The messages around body shapes and sizes and what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Thank you for clarifying those. And yeah, it is fascinating, though sad, but just so how it's linked to, and I've never considered having an experience of choking, how that would lead to someone to not want to eat, but it makes sense. That would,
Mhm.
be so scary to go through, and maybe avoiding all certain types of food that you might need. So, um, can you share with us any like success stories that you feel? I mean, obviously, we're not going to talk specifically about names or whatever unless you have permission, but what would be something that you've been proud of maybe in the last few years where you really felt like your practice was able to help a client?
Yeah, well, let me just start with my own. I actually, I really considered myself recovered from my eating disorder. So
Mm,
to be in this toxic culture and to be able to navigate it from a place of strength coming from myself and my value and have shame resilience. So, example, I actually went through a really difficult time in life, personally, medically, all at once. And I lost weight, but it wasn't like, oh, this is a good thing. It was not. And so to
mm,
have people like, wow, you look so great. You can be bombarded with these internal questions like, oh, wait, did I not look okay before? And what is this? And then to have a
mm,
friend who knows me, but I hadn't really connected with in a while, come up to me and ask me, are you okay?
mm.
Because she knows me and she saw me. And I
Yeah.
knew, like, this is not where my body's going to stay. But to be able to navigate that from a place of strength and not go back into the eating disorder and think, oh, I guess this is a good thing. I should try and keep this off. It's like, you know what? This is not healthy. I'm trying to take care of myself. It's hard right now. So that would be, and again, with the crazy things that may come our way against around body image and to be able to stay strong. So I do believe in full recovery. Like you can get to the place where you can accept your own body for the shape and size it is and be able to nourish and be. I'm very much about intuitive eating for long-term recovery. Early on, it may not be part of things, but that. And then just some of the stories that may be a family that had a teenager that came in, they had gone on a family vacation that was a disaster because they couldn't do the things that food is normal on vacations. You go to meals as a family and it was truly an awful experience. And to get a Christmas card a few years later of them at the same place they had vacationed with the smiling family and the mom, being able to say, it was such a different experience, thank you for your help and support in the process. Or to get which I did maybe a year or so ago from a client that I worked with, very, very successful professional woman who, when we started on talking about intuitive eating and deers in the headlight of like, no, I have to control everything. There's no way that's happening. And to write me a couple of years later and say that she was, talking to a group and giving her own kind of personal testimony, if you will, of her own process, and then realizing it's like, wow, I'm there. I didn't think I could ever get there, and I'm there. So I always love hearing back from people, or it's always, to me, the highest form of encouragement is if a client who I worked with actually refers someone to me. I can appreciate referrals from other professionals, but from someone who you worked with that refers to you is just the highest form of a compliment to me. So,
that's great. Absolutely. Those sound awesome. And I really appreciate you sharing your own personal side of things. It's always very powerful. And as we've seen in many of our episodes, so many people had some of the issues that they now love to help others. So, what would you say, what advice would you give to people maybe in the middle of these types of counseling programs or considering going into this work, whether it's on the dietitian end or as a counselor? What would you want them to hear?
Yeah, so sometimes I will have people interview me like they're going through their program, and you know how you have to go and interview people. We all had to do it, right? So we'll have people come interview me. So the main thing that I say first and foremost is do your own work. It's like really just be engaged in your own, be it in therapy or some other sort of group or growth work, or you found this retreat thing you could go to or whatever. It's like, just do your own work. And then if you're going into the field with eating disorders, I would say really do your own work around feeling comfortable in your own skin with your own body, which I do tell people, I think that the best body image work we can do is the work around self-compassion. And as we know, that's a practice, and it's really a practice around being comfortable in our own skin. And so, being able to sit in the midst of people in their own and not feed into those or get caught up in our own or make it about ourselves. So really so much, which again, to me, if I just simplify, and it's not necessarily simple, but to me, self-compassion is not abandoning yourself in your pain, really to just be with yourself in that moment, even if it's not like, no, but you're great and you're a rock star and whatever. It's not really trying to, because that's kind of abandoning yourself too. It's really more just like, oh, this is really hard right now. Wow, I'm really struggling here. And just really being safe, but I'm here with myself. It's okay. It's going to be okay. I'm not leaving you. I love you, so.
I love that. And there's always the deeper issues, right? They just come out in different forms. So much of what people are struggling with innately is the same, but it appears in such a variety of ways. So
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Um, I think we've gotten a lot of great insights from you, and I thank you so much for giving us your time on here today. Why don't you at least mention your website, and in case anyone did want to reach out or be in touch with you, remind us of that.
Sure. It's recoveryreconnection.com.
All right. Yes, I
Yeah.
was on there. Lots to view and see and looking at services. And I think people look from different angles. Some people need the services, and then some people, want to see your website and how it looks. And I think it's amazing that you have stayed in this same practice all these years with the same name. You probably are like renowned in Texas. There has to be a lot of people who know about you.
Well, thank you. I will say when I started, again, there weren't a lot of websites. And then along the way, people were like, you should change it to your name. And I'm like, no, because I have SEO that's really built at this point. Like,
Yeah.
they'll Google my name or whatever and find my website. So, but thank you for that
Yeah.
compliment. I appreciate that.
No, that's really, and there's nothing wrong. A lot of people hop around or they're in this practice or then they're on their own. And there's, good things for that. But it's really cool when someone has found what they wanted early on and
Mm,
stuck with it. And I'm sure continuing to learn on the way. So thank
yeah, for
you
sure.
so much for your time today, Carol.
You bet, Becky. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And to our listeners, we're so thankful that you tuned in. I hope you learned some new things, and we'd love to hear from you on comments on social media. If you have questions or you want to explore this topic, feel free to check out Carol's website. Please tune in next time as we continue to explore the world of therapy and counseling. Have a wonderful day.